Huge questions on tonight's show. I know many of you listen on podcasts, so you won't see what's in my hand, but I hold in my hand essentially the beginning of college football season. Once this bad boy is open, college football season is underway. And what is this bad boy for those of you, immunity, listening on podcasts? Well, it is one of those really, really padded envelopes that important documents get shipped in, and it says JP Poll on the front, all red. Jesse asked me, is it written in blood? I don't think that's the question. Of course it's written in blood. Whose blood is it written in? Which of your beloved teams out there will be left out of the JP poll? We are live, jam-packed, high atop a crowded downtown Nashville, Tennessee, Sunday, July 28th, the year of our Lord 2024. That's right. For those of you who have been enrolled here at Pate State for a long time, we don't normally drop the JP poll in July, but then again, we don't normally drop conference predictions and playoff predictions in July. Things change. So we got that tonight. I've got issues at Georgia again, and we will discuss again. And I will be as candid as I can again. Dabo Swinney, the legacy question popped up because Dabo said some things at ACC Media Days the other day about his philosophy on transfer portal and his philosophy on, how to run the program he's run pretty successfully for well over a decade now. And so one of you chimed in. The general rule around here is if one of you asks a question, usually like 100 of you have been thinking it. So if 10 of you asked it, which in a roundabout way you did, Stats and Info can run the numbers. That means a lot of you are thinking it. So we're going to talk about that tonight. I got bold predictions. Hey, it's that time of decade. We're going to talk Tennessee recruiting. So many of you have been after me. When are you going to talk Tennessee recruiting? When are you going to put out the Tennessee GIF? If you're not on the socials, don't worry about that part. Tonight's the answer. They're watching us in Fort Myers, Florida. Jesse, check if there's a Fort Miles down there. They're watching us in Ames, Iowa, Marengo, Illinois, a place I've actually been before, and Fort Payne, Alabama. Let me give you a fair word of warning. It's still July. August is going to be loaded around here. The shows will be loaded. Obviously, we're welcoming masses and masses back to the college football table, but also on our show, there are so many things that we've sort of pushed to August. We got gas station recruiting wars going down. I got like 4 other things I can't tell you yet that we've been cooking. We're in a temporary studio right now. That will soon change one way or the other. So there's a whole lot coming on top of just welcome back college football in August. So at Late Kick Josh, make sure you're following on the socials and make sure you're watching the shows. Thank you so much because like tons of you are right now. I just merely ask that you continue. This is either a really down way or a really up way to start the show based on whether you have allegiance to Georgia or not. So let's get after it. Colin, I'm trying to give you a really good endpoint here when you edit this. We got more off-field issues to talk about at Georgia, which means we have culture issues to talk about. It's a big word that's being thrown around lately. Georgia, culture. Culture, Georgia. If you have been living your life and you haven't been paying attention to the headlines, I don't blame you. Ra Thomas is a transfer wide receiver there from Missouri, formerly, I believe, and he got arrested, and it's pretty serious charges. Among them are cruelty to children charges, and that happened a couple of days ago. The arrest was Friday morning at 3 a.m. So that just gets tossed up on a scrap heap of like 24 or so very high-profile arrests at Georgia, most of them driving and traffic related. This one is a world above and beyond that and has really nothing to do with those. Or does it? Because then the age-old question at this point gets tossed on top of all that, and that is, well, what kind of culture has Kirby Smart built over there at Georgia? So, of course, all of that's inexcusable. So let's get that out of the way. No one needs to ever have charges like that thrown against them. Now, I haven't seen to this point anything else come of that. So because of the seriousness of the nature of those charges, I'm going to hang back and see what actually happened on that front. I'm just going to assume, because it's not the first time that Ra Thomas has had those kinds of run-ins with the law, that there's something there. I don't know anything about that. So what we do know is another Georgia player got arrested. That led us to Saturday. So Saturday mornings when most of the world sees that, it's when I saw it. And so I sat there and I said, here it goes. and I made my morning breakfast, and I cranked up the internet, and sure enough, the avalanche hit me square in the face. And so I responded, Colin, do me a favor, dial up the tweet I put out. If you haven't seen this yet, and you're looking on YouTube, just read it. If you haven't seen it and you're listening on podcast, here's what it says. Pay close attention here. Casuals will say Georgia's culture is rotten and then trash anyone who doesn't predict them to win the SEC. This is intentional silence, so I just want to give you a second. What do you think about that? It's not that it doesn't matter. I didn't say it doesn't matter. I didn't say culture doesn't matter. In fact, there's a lot there I didn't say that people heard me say. So here is what I'm simply trying to say. I really don't think you care. A lot of you, I really don't think you care. So in that tweet, here's what wasn't said. Let me just deal with this first. 95% of people who responded to that poorly had cartoon characters for their profile on Twitter. So they're not serious people. Most of these unserious people heard me say, this is no big deal. Well, I never said that. They said, you're telling me Kirby's not at fault? Nope, he is at fault. He's the leader of the program. It falls at his feet. So I never said that either. Are you taking allegations of child cruelty lightly? No, I take them very seriously. Are you telling me there's not an issue here? No, it seems like there's a pretty big issue here. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying I don't think you really care about it. So last week, we had a show where we did our season preview, and we predicted conference championship winners, we predicted the playoff, and trust me, all of this ties together because I put it out there, and I didn't have Georgia in the SEC championship game. I had them in the playoff. What was it, Jesse, as like a 9 or a 10 seed or something like that. And so I had a lot of people come at me and say, how crazy is that? How stupid is that? Georgia's the best team in this conference. You don't even have them playing for the SEC title game? And okay, that's normal. You can disagree with the prediction. But here's the funny thing. The funny thing is, this headline drops on Saturday morning, where there is yet another in a long line now of off-field issues for Georgia. And people hop on me, and they're talking about culture. They're yelling about culture. Georgia's got a culture. You're going to call out Georgia's culture. And the thing about it is they're DMing me. DM means direct message for those of you who don't use the socials. And so a lot of these people, I think, forgot that I can see the previous message they sent me. So what happened was Saturday morning, I probably had 1 to 2 dozen that I opened instances where someone was calling Georgia's culture out, and no more than 48 hours earlier, they'd called me stupid for not predicting Georgia to win the conference. So my reply was, well, hold up. Do you think their culture sucks or doesn't it? And if you think their culture sucks, do you really just not think culture matters? And so I replied that a few times, and I got a bunch of back, so I tweeted it publicly. Colin, do me a favor one more time and throw the tweet back up. Casuals will say Georgia's culture is rotten and then trash anyone who doesn't predict them to win the SEC. I think culture is really important. I think it's a very, very vital piece, especially if you exist in a world where there are other high-level programs that culturally have their act together. You're probably not going to get away with having a bad one. I had a lot of folks throw Florida 2008 in my face. Florida won a national title in 2008, and since then we've learned internally they were a mess. That is one example. You've got some Miami teams in decades past that could be provided theoretically as an example of a place where there was a lot of off-field incident and issue, but on the field, boy, they were a wrecking crew. That's true. Far more likely and far more plentiful are the examples of programs and ultimately teams that massively underachieved because they had the talent piece, but they didn't have the culture piece. The overwhelming rule in this sport, contrary to those exceptions, has been and always will be, if you got a lot of talent in the locker room, that's a starting point. But if your culture sucks, you're not ultimately going to achieve at the highest level. Now, some of these places stack so much talent, Florida 08, Miami, depending on which year you want to talk about, that they can even afford to be loose culturally, but because they are so premier talent-wise, they could still win it all. But that's not my point. My point's not that Georgia can't win it all, but if you really think that their culture's a mess, and someone merely predicts them to, not make the SEC title game, do you really think culture matters all that much? If you're coming after that person, Yeah, their culture sucks, but you're crazy if you don't think they're going to win the SEC. You're crazy if you don't think they're going to be in the SEC championship game. So then I had another kind of person who came and said, no, no, no. I am not saying any of these things. I'm saying that if you have a win at all cost mentality, Josh, then maybe that's the culture. And so maybe winning football games is the culture they have there. Off-field incidents be damned. Maybe winning football games is the culture absent anything else mattering. I do think Georgia has a culture. I just think it's a win at all cost mentality. I got that a lot. I don't know how many people ended up saying that to me. So I'm going to get to that in a second. Here's what I'm saying. I'm not saying culture doesn't matter. I'm not even saying Georgia might not have issues there. I just am saying I don't think most of you care about it. I really don't think most of you care about it because almost nobody who yells about culture on the internet actually cares about culture. You kind of have this circular faux caring that, gets worked up inside you when you see a lot of other people saying things and you desperately want to say something impactful online. And so you grab your torch and your pitchfork and you go after someone, and then you put the torch down and the pitchfork down and you log off, you go take a shower, you're going about your day. You're not really outraged by anything. It doesn't matter if it actually impacted someone's life or not. I'm just saying I don't think most of you care about it. Most of you can't beat Georgia on the field. That's what it boils down to. So this is as close as a lot of you get to a victory over Georgia. Because if it was happening at UL Monroe, all due respect, I don't think any of us would hear much about it. But it's happening at Georgia. And to whom much is given, much is expected. And to whom a big spotlight is given, a lot more scrutiny is going to be placed on the head of. Yes, 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 those are Meemaw's quotes, and I understand all that, and I acknowledge that. But I really don't think you care. So that's what I was calling out. It's not that the stuff is irrelevant. It's not that the stuff doesn't matter. It's not that there aren't people's lives actually being put in danger with the actions of some Georgia players off the field. All that's true. All that's bad. I'm not calling them out. I'm not even making a commentary on them. That's a whole separate thing. I was just replying to a lot of people who pretend to be outraged by it who aren't really outraged by it. It's just the top football program in America. Most of you hadn't been able to beat them on the field aside from Alabama. And so this is your only shot to take a shot. So you've taken shots. If I'm wrong about you, then I'm wrong about you. Now, I had one of our viewers DM me today and say, I genuinely care about public safety. I'm not talking about you if that's how you feel. If you just genuinely care about public safety, we've had loss of life up there because of poor off-field decisions. I don't make light of that. You have some serious allegations against Ra Thomas. Hey, I don't make light of that. And if your genuine motivation for calling that out is you're scared for the public safety of others, and you think that Georgia football has really become a nuisance in that regard, absent anything else in the football world mattering, well, number one, that's a perfectly valid way to feel, and I'm obviously not talking about you because I doubt you came at me about something as inconsequential as an SEC championship prediction and then in the very next breath talked about something as serious as this. I'm talking about the folks who contradict themselves and don't even realize they're contradicting themselves. Two things that I don't think are true here. First, Kirby Smart's not doing anything about this. Kirby needs to do something about it. Kirby's done a ton. It may not have worked across the board. There's a big difference in Kirby doing what he thinks is best, Kirby Smart and Georgia at large doing what they think needs to be done to prevent this stuff, and it's still happening, versus Kirby Smart and Georgia not doing anything and it continuing to happen. It is not my place to air all that stuff out. They can do it in their own time if they want to. If Georgia and Kirby Smart would like to publicize the steps they've taken internally to try and prevent this stuff, they can. I promise you, they've done everything they know to do. Notice what I just said. I didn't say they've done everything it takes because obviously some stuff still keeps happening. I said they've done everything they know to do. I can promise you there are many parents watching the show tonight who probably at one time or another in your own lives have arrived at a point where you feel like you instilled discipline in your son or your daughter. You taught them the right and wrong. You tried to guide them on the right path. But guess whose job it ultimately is to make decisions? It ain't yours. You're not raising a robot. It's a human. Now imagine you've got like 100 of them in your building that are all alpha types and got tons of money tossed in their lap. and you don't really legally get to do to them what parents get to do to them, this stuff can still happen. It's not excuse making. It falls at the feet of Kirby Smart. It's not excuse making. It just is. So it's a lie when people say, oh, they haven't done anything there. No, they obviously just haven't done enough there. They've taken action. They thought it was enough. Maybe it's not. The other thing is this win at all costs mentality. I don't think Georgia has a win at all costs mentality. I really don't. Again, I am cheating because I've gotten to see inside the program. So I know how they go about things. I know what they stand upon. I know what the principles and values there are. You can either choose to believe that or not. It doesn't change what the reality is. It doesn't change what the fact is. It's an imperfect program. It's a flawed program. It's a really good program. It's a place where I genuinely believe they're trying to do things the right way. It just hasn't worked out across the board like they want it to. This is not the first place where a group of people have instilled what they hope to be the right DNA inside the program and define their core principles and values, and not everyone adhered to it. It's not the first time that's ever happened. It's just the latest example in a high-profile setting of that not happening. But I will maintain this. A lot of you made fun of me for saying this. That's fine, because I still believe it. Kirby Smart can do all he knows to do there. Kirby Smart's going to have team after team after team. Kirby Smart can coach as long as he wants to. The seniors in that group got one more go-around. It's their team. It's their responsibility. They got to take it upon themselves to police themselves. That's not absolving the adults in the room. Above and beyond the adults in the room, the best teams out there are not coach-led. The best teams out there, the ones that'll be there at the finish line, the programs that are there every single year in the mix, they're not there because the coaches look over players' shoulders constantly. They're there because the coaches don't have to look over the players' shoulders constantly because the best teams are player-led. And so if Georgia's worth its salt, if they're going to fulfill on the potential, if they're going to fulfill on these preseason predictions that a lot of people have heaped upon them, the players will take care of it there. And if the players don't, then Georgia as a program won't achieve at the level as high as maybe they were capable of achieving. That's it. I don't even get what's controversial about that. I do get what's controversial because folks just want to scalp. You know, Kirby suspended Ra Thomas indefinitely the other day. And people were still yelling for him to do something. And I'm looking around like, he just did. No, but he needs to do more. What in the world do you want him to do? Do you want him to personally accompany Ra Thomas down to Guantanamo and throw away the key? What would you like him to do? It's an ongoing investigation. What more is he supposed to do? You're trying to apply logic at that point to a totally illogical situation. And by the way, fact of the matter is, if this was happening for DeBoer at Alabama, Georgia folks just as crazily would be yelling the same stuff Bama folks are yelling. If it were happening with Hugh Freeze at Auburn, Bama and Georgia folks would be yelling the same thing. So this is not exclusive to Georgia. Georgia just happens to be the one in the wrong spotlight right now. So those are my thoughts on that. Let's move on to much happier times in the show tonight. Happy you're with us. I'll be happy to listen to your opinions. I'm sure a lot of you are going to counter what I just said. All I ask, humbly, all I ask is that if you disagree with what I said, it won't be the first time, won't be the last time, but if you disagree with what I said, make sure you heard what I actually said. That's all I ask, because I have found on this particular topic, 90+% of the disagreements that I've gotten into stem from people not knowing what I actually said. So that's all I ask. Okay, we move along. We are unveiling the preseason edition of the JP poll, not in 10 minutes, not in 2 hours, not next week, right now. Here it is. This is a big moment. What is this, Josh? I'm new to this show. I just tuned in the last year. Well, I will tell you what this is as I open this really, really expensive envelope that management doesn't even know I used. This is the JP poll. I hold in my hand the JP poll right now. Huge immunity, just huge immunity. And if you don't know what that means, I will educate you in due time on that as well. So if you're new around here, the JP poll, most important rule that you could ever know, don't lose to food. So don't lose to rice. The second most important rule you could know is power ratings are not rankings. Say it with me again. Power ratings are not rankings. These are not rankings. This has nothing to do with merit. This has nothing to do with your win-loss record. Frankly, we really don't care all that much about that. This is about future-facing neutral field favorability. Josh, what is the difference between rankings and ratings? I have prepared a helpful example. Imagine you grew up with a kid named Jeff and a kid named Steve. The names are interchangeable here. Don't focus on the wrong part of the story. Jeff is faster than Steve. You guys have raced as kids a million times, and Jeff beat Steve 100 times out of 100. You guys grow up, you go to different high schools. Jeff versus Steve is the finals in the city track meet. Who are you picking to win? You're picking Jeff to win. Why are you picking Jeff to win? Is that just a blind guess? No. You've got guided information. You have used your data, in this case your eyeballs, that has seen Jeff beat Steve 100 times out of 100, and you're picking Jeff to win based on that. There's the gun. They're off. Jeff gets out of the block fast. He's pulling ahead of Steve. Jeff trips. Oh, my goodness. Jeff trips. Steve pulls ahead of him. Jeff gets up, but it's too late because Steve's got pretty decent speed himself. Steve breaks the tape at the finish line first. Who deserves the trophy? Who won the race? The answer is Steve. Who deserves to be ranked higher that day? Who deserves to be on the number 1 podium, and who deserves to be on the number 2 podium? The answer is Steve number 1, Jeff number 2. This is an example in the merit-based world of how rankings work. However, story's not done. Jeff gets mad. Jeff, in true Stone Cold Steve Austin fashion, I believe the night after King of the Ring 98 against Kane, he tells Steve, I want a rematch. You know this wasn't fair. Or maybe it was fair, but you know you're not better than me. Will you give me a rematch? And Steve, stupidly, says, yes, I'll give you a rematch. They race again the next week. Who are you picking? Every one of you are picking Jeff again. That's how a power rating works. And someone could say, how could you pick Jeff? This race just happened last week. Steve won it. He's got the medal around his neck. Why would you pick Jeff? Well, maybe because the fastest runner doesn't always win the race. Maybe some outside variables can occasionally interfere. Or in football terms, maybe we score in 3s and 7s. Maybe the road matters. Maybe injury matters. Maybe luck and bounce of ball matters. Maybe the best team doesn't always win on a Saturday, is what I'm saying. Maybe those odds makers and their process and approach have a little merit of their own baked in. So that's what we do with the JP poll. JP poll, according to the model, which is right next to me, is how the model would stack teams if it had to favor them against one another on a neutral field. If it had to spit out its own point spread via a power rating, this is how we would power rate them. I'm going to go 1 through 25 tonight. I'm going to go pretty fast. I'm going to give you some helpful notes along the way because this is the first time that we've unveiled this year, so I know a lot of you are going to have questions. 1 through 5 is pretty clear. And I think most power ratings out there, odds makers, FanDuel included, you'll probably see this 1 through 5. Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, Oregon 3, Texas 4, Alabama 5. Now, you may switch order. You may have Texas ahead of Oregon, Ohio State ahead of Georgia, but that's a pretty clear 1 through 5. Now, I do want to tell you, Georgia is number 1. They're not my pick to win the SEC. How is that? Well, twofold. Number 1, this is the model. This is not my gut. My gut has nothing to do with this. My opinion has nothing to do with this. This is the model spitting this out. I just trust the model implicitly. And number 2, even if I agreed with the model, and I kind of do, I'd probably rank Georgia number 1 right now. I just don't think there's a massive gap between Georgia and these other teams here. I think there's a 7-point gap. The model thinks there's a 7-point gap between Georgia and Alabama, neutral field. So number 1 to number 5, 7-point gap. That's not massive. That's not insurmountable. And it's a smaller gap between, say, Ohio State and Oregon and Texas. So Georgia's number 1, but they play the number 4 team on the road, the number 5 team on the road, the number 8 team on the road. They get number 14 at home. I'll show you them in a little while. They get the number 19 team on a neutral site. They get the number 21 team on a neutral site. So I got Georgia playing 6 of the top 21 teams in the country this year, and only one of those games is in Athens. So how could you have Georgia power rated number 1, but think they may fall short of the SEC championship game? Because they got a harder schedule than some of these teams. It's very, very simple. There are 5 SEC and Big Ten teams here. And as I said, there's a 7-point gap between number 1 and number 5. All right, next up. This is where the controversy first enters the equation. I'm not sure I agree with it, but look, it's the model's turn to talk. That's how the JP poll works. You know who we have number 6? Jesse had nothing to do with this. Penn State is number 6. And I need to tell you, there's not a drop-off. There's not a gap between 5 and 6. In fact, the gap is between Penn State and Notre Dame. There's no gap. There's like a half a point gap or a 0.3 point gap between Penn State and Bama. Bama's 5, Penn State 6. There's a 2.5 point gap between Penn State and Notre Dame. This surprised me. The model apparently has bought all the Andy Kotelnicki stock it can. It's bought all the Drew Aller stock it can. It loves the tight end position, does the model. So we got Penn State 6, Notre Dame number 7. Notre Dame, the second highest rated pair of coordinators in the country next to Ohio State, according to the model. Ole Miss number 8, FSU number 9, LSU number 10. Now you notice, once you get down 8, 9, 10, not that there are perfect teams out there, but you start spotting more obvious flaws, potential flaws. So Ole Miss, defense. Florida State, we don't know what necessarily to expect at quarterback. LSU, defense is a total mystery. This is where it's important because you could pick any of these teams apart. We're not measuring these teams against perfection. We're measuring them against the field. That's how power ratings work. And so we're measuring an entire team relative to the rest of the teams around them. So LSU's number 10, you could say, oh, Josh, I think their defense is going to be terrible. Well, maybe it will. Their defense was terrible last year, and they finished 9-3 and had a Heisman Trophy winner and would have made the playoff if we had one. So, again, you could have a bad defense and still be a top 10 team, depending on how good the field is around you. Let's go 11 through 15, and then I'm going to stop and I'm going to point something out for you. Number 11, that's where Michigan is. I think I'd have Michigan a couple of spots higher. That's splitting hairs. The gap's not that big. But the model starts Michigan at number 11. Oklahoma hanging out there bordering on the top 10. Oklahoma at number 12. Texas A&M, 13. Tennessee, 14. And Missouri, 15. This model has no clue what conference you're in. So save it with the SEC bias thing. Save it with the Big Ten bias thing. It sees a blind stat profile. That's what it sees. The SEC teams have a lot more talent per capita than most teams out there. Therefore, they are going to get some nods of the head and favorable treatment in any kind of power rating format. And I do want to note this. We're through 15 teams here. We got 9 SEC teams in the top 15. We got 4 Big Tens. We only got 1 ACC team so far. That's Florida State. And we've got 1 independent, and that's Notre Dame. That changes quickly once you get outside the top 15. So number 16 through 20, we got Kansas State. That's the first Big 12 team. We got them number 16. Utah's right there behind them at 17. In fact, I think they had the same rating, so we could call that a tie at 16. Miami is 18. Clemson's 19. USC's 20. So the model, albeit by 0.1 points, has Miami ahead of Clemson. And the bigger note there is Clemson's floating down there in the low teens, around number 20. USC number 20, USC total wild card. I could see them being 30th. I could see them being 10th, and neither would really surprise me. Kansas State at number 16 would be a 1.2 point favorite against number 20 USC right now. So the gap between 16 and 20 is ultra compressed. We call this accordion mode. The accordion as an instrument, you expand, contract, expand, contract. Well, this thing's really contracted. 16 through 20, there's no gap whatsoever. You could just view these teams as basically the same right now. The model does anyway. Moving along, number 21 through 25. This will get fun really quick. The model has Florida at number 21. Save it. I'm going to come back to it. Save it. Iowa at number 22. Oklahoma State, my preseason pick to win the Big 12, at number 23. Wisconsin, 24. Iowa State, 25. I knew the model would come through. Iowa State at number 25. So let's talk about Florida for just a second, shall we? Florida's at number 21. How is this possible? Florida's over-under win total is 4.5. Well, it's because they play a whole lot of teams better than them. That's why their win total is 4.5. The model, at least, thinks that Florida could legitimately compete to win the Big 12. As is. Take the team, drop them in the Big 12. They could compete to win the Big 12. Not only that, But if I'm looking at Clemson and Miami just within a point or two of Florida, it also thinks they could compete to win the ACC. So Florida, don't let them get imprisoned by a tough schedule and all of a sudden you look and you think, oh, the quality of team is bad. Now, maybe the model's wrong and the quality of Florida's team ends up not being good. More likely is that Florida's a really improved team. Florida's floating in that 20 to 25 range, and they end up playing a ton of teams ranked ahead of them, and they lose those games, and then you falsely believe that Florida's terrible. There's a world where they go 6-6 or 7-5, and they're like the 24th best team in the country. There's a world where that could happen because of their schedule. Also, Iowa's at 22. If Iowa can get any offense, Iowa's one of the sleeper teams in the country this year. We had Kirk Ferentz. I think it was Cannell and I. We interviewed Kirk Ferentz the other day at Big Ten Media Days, and Kirk Ferentz always has like a sly grin on his face. So he had it, and he was talking about how they're bringing in Tim Lester, the offensive coordinator, and they're changing some things up. They haven't played to the standard on the offensive line they've wanted to, and okay. I know it's hard to believe in offensive progression at Iowa. I have a hard time believing in it. If it happens, heads up there, because I don't think they're forgetting how to play defense anytime soon. So that's the top 25. This is the model. This is not me. Remember, I have the right to override this at any point, but I did not because it's the preseason, and I will absolutely have an update of this before week 1 because we get a ton of intel from fall camp. There are injury updates during fall camp. The model has every player in the country power rated. And so any kind of depth chart hit that you take, the model will take into account. There are 8, count them, 8 top 25 matchups according to the model's ratings in the first 3 weeks of the season. 8 top 25 matchups. The gap from number 23 to number 40 is 5 points. So there is just a logjam of teams that basically have the same profile, just different logos. So think about this. The gap from Georgia, number 1, to number 23 is 18 points. In other words, Georgia versus the number 23 team would be Georgia minus 18 on a neutral field. Probably lean Georgia there, but Georgia minus 18. So the gap between 1 and 23 is 18 points. The gap between 23 and 40 is 5 points. So clearly you have a higher tier, and then you got that middle tier, and that middle tier, anyone's ball game. You could, for example, you could have a couple of injuries on the offensive line, not play a football game at all, and drop from number 23 to number 37. And it looks like, why did I just drop 14 spots? Well, that sounds like a long way to drop. In reality, it's just because your power rating dropped 1.75 points because your offensive line as a unit took a little deduction in your overall individual power rating, and that's how much it affected you. So it's not a long way to fall in terms of points. This is probably one of the most fun things that we do during the season. This will happen every Tuesday. The JP poll gets released every Tuesday night. Power ratings are not rankings, no matter what they tell you. And it's a running joke on the show because you will see, especially on the good old socials, you will see me, what do we put it at, guys? Probably 15 times during any given week when someone questions why I have so-and-so ranked above so-and-so. And what do I have to say? I have to say, I didn't have anyone ranked anywhere. And then someone comes in, gets mad, argues, that's just semantics. They're the same thing. Nope. Remember, Jeff versus Steve, city championship track meet. What did Jeff teach us? Power ratings are not rankings. If they were, then you would have picked Steve to win the next week, and you didn't. And I pray for anyone who tuned in late and just heard that metaphor on the back end without the context of the front end. Again, all I can do is pray. Or I could pray and then tell you rewind the show later and listen to the front end. So that's the JP poll. I can't wait to have all of you agree with that. Academy Sports and Outdoors. I'm not necessarily going to say they endorse the JP poll because I'm sure those guys are at odds probably with some of those ratings as well. However, they support the JP poll. I know this. I have talked to our fine friends at Academy about the JP poll. But you know what else I've talked to them about? And some of you have been listening. Back to school and back to sports. I had, I don't know how many of you, several of you tagged me, and I didn't even ask for you to do it, which is the best kind of tag, over the weekend, because some of you took me up on that challenge or that suggestion. Head to Academy. you're going to be in the market for a lot of back to sports, back to school supplies anyway. Equipment, supplies, choose the phrasing. Academy's got it all. And they make this show free of charge to you. So they're doing all of us a favor, and then they're carrying all the stuff that we need. So it's a no-brainer. Check them out. If you can't get there in person, academy.com has what you need. And make sure, if you've never been to one before, you're in for a treat. I wish I could walk into an academy for the first time again. That'd be fun. Make sure you go in there, because whatever you think an academy is on the inside is way grander than what you think it is. They got stuff in there you would never think. You would walk in, and within 30 seconds, you say, whoa, Academy's got that? Yup, Academy's got that. Possible new marketing slogan. All right, Colin, throw me the Clemson tweet. Let me reach all the way over here. Oh, never mind. I can't reach my water jug. And I'm not going to ask Bradley to come in here. He should do it without me having to ask. I don't think most of you were paying attention to ACC Media Days. That's okay. You have lives to live. But we were. And Oliver in Raleigh, North Carolina, asked me a question, and I just decided, you know what, tonight's as good as night as any. Let's dive into this. He said, Dabo's legacy is on the line this season, in my opinion. If Clemson doesn't perform close to their peak from the mid-20 teens this year, Dabo has to face facts that he's being left in the past and his vision is outdated. Let me be very clear about something. Nothing about Dabo Swinney's legacy will ever be on the line for football-related reasons. The only thing that could tear apart Dabo Swinney's legacy is some sort of scandal that happens off the field that goes well above and beyond football, and it tarnishes what he accomplished as a coach. And I know nothing of anything of that nature surrounding him. So if we're talking about football, I couldn't care less if the guy never wins double digits again. Let's just assume, Oliver, that worst case happens. And worst case at Clemson is they don't win the ACC again under Dabo. And he refuses to use the portal, and his competitors do use the portal. And while they may not bat 1,000 in the portal, it does up their game, and it ties Clemson's hand behind their back when they play FSU or Miami. And so let's just say, worst of worst cases, that Clemson regresses to just being a pretty good program. Dabo Swinney's legacy is still he's one of the greatest of all time. What happened to his legacy? If this was 2014, Dabo hadn't accomplished all that he's accomplished, and we were talking about the game maybe leaving him behind, and by the way, that's an opinion that the jury is still out on. But if we were talking about all that, and it was 2014, and we hadn't had like the Taj Boyd to Deshaun Watson to Trevor Lawrence, if we hadn't had all that happen, yeah, okay, well, the legacy's not cemented. That's a national championship trophy he just kissed. And he's got another one to kiss if he breaks up with that one. The legacy, what legacy? You're talking about a dude who completely rebuilt a program with no prior head coaching experience. Who else do you say that about? Do you know how small the group of people are that, or the group of people is that you can say that about? Dabo Swinney, never been a head coach before, gets elevated to head coach at Clemson, and Clemson's been around for a long time. I mean, Clemson was around before Meemaw was even born. That's how long Clemson's been around. They've played football there for a long time. And he took it, and he totally reinvented it. He reinvented it to the point where what Clemson had been previous to him or prior to him didn't really matter to anyone anymore. Aside from Clemson fans, it didn't really matter. And the funny thing is, in the interim, they made fun of him because there were a few big games where Clemson famously face-planted. They called it Clemsoning. So not only did he reinvent Clemson, just for good measure, just to drop the elbow on everyone in the public, he redefined what Clemsoning was as well. Clemsoning is beating Bama when you get another shot at him in 2016. And it's running them out of the building a couple of years after that when you get yet another shot against them in a national championship setting. Clemson was one of the premier programs in college football. They hadn't taken 10 steps back. They may have taken 1 or 2 steps back, but okay. So I think we beat that piñata pretty thoroughly. But let's just talk about this thing, because he was at ACC Media Days last week, was Dabo Swinney, and he talked again about the transfer portal, and he offered his philosophy yet again. And I've been as clear as I can possibly be on this, but it does sound confusing. I will grant you that. It sounds a little weird when I talk about this because it does sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. I kind of am. It's just the difference in my personal opinion, but also setting my opinion aside and respecting someone who is going about things in a maybe different way than I'd love to see them go about it. That's where I am on Dabo. I'd love to see him take more chances in the portal. I'd love to see Clemson go out there and get their own Keon Coleman. I'd love to see that. But I know why they don't do it. And the why they don't do it makes perfect sense to me. It's not just the what Dabo's doing, or in this case, it's not just the what Dabo's not doing. It's why he's not doing it. If his biggest crime against college football is he has defined values and principles of his own, and he's going to adhere to them not just when he's winning titles, but when they may be, stepping back to only winning 9 or 10 games, then that's not a crime that needs to be punished to a great deal, to me. It doesn't matter if I love it or not. I don't run the program. He's not accountable to me. I'm not his athletic director. I'm not even one of his season ticket holders. You cannot have, on one hand, the values and principles that make up Clemson football under Dabo Swinney yield all the results that it yielded to you the previous decade, but then encourage him to throw all that out the window because you're not in the moment getting the results you want in the next decade. And you're certainly not ever going to be a serious person on this show that suggests his legacy's on line. His legacy's not on the line. He'd go 0-12 this year, and his legacy's cemented, at least in my mind. Maybe you disagree with me on that, Oliver? And I appreciate the question. Sounds like I'm yelling at you. I appreciate the question. I just get a little worked up about this. I get worked up about it because, there are these words that get thrown around, legacy. It's just like culture. And I think some people don't have the slightest clue what they mean. Because if you did, you'd speak about those things with a lot more gravity in your words than there are. You don't. What do you think it takes to build a legacy? Because I think it takes a lot. A lot. You don't build a legacy in 1 or 2 years. Neither did Dabo. And so you don't tear one down in 1 or 2 years either. And once it's been cemented, it's been cemented. Bobby Bowden had a legacy. And then Bobby Bowden's results waned in the closing years of his career. Well, how do we talk about Bobby Bowden's legacy today? And that's way worse than what Clemson was. Like FSU fell off pretty precipitously there near the end under Bobby Bowden. Does anyone talk about, when people talk about Bobby Bowden, does anyone say, well, yeah, boy, those 90s FSU teams were good, but you know what ruins it for me? 04, 05, 06. No one talks about that. You don't even remember it. Boy, Michael Jordan, if it were just not for those Wizards years, I think he was a really, really good player. But I seen in that Washington jersey, that just really tainted it for me. You don't care. You don't care, because that's not how legacy actually works. So no, Dabo's legacy is not on the line. I'll tell you what's on the line. Clemson's odds and Clemson's chances of winning the ACC in 2024. That's what's on the line, and that's all that's on the line. They're watching us in Stockton, California, Charlotte, North Carolina, Domino, Texas, possibly Domino, probably Domino, and Pell City, Alabama. I've had the most horrific luck in pronouncing city names recently. I've been on a really, really cold streak in pronouncing city names. So I'm just going to pronounce them every way I know how to. If you're watching live, thank you guys so much. Here, I'm going to say hi. I'm going to say it twice in the live chat. I contemplated, and I still am contemplating, just doing something with the live chat where we go live one day and I just look at it and I just react. It could be a disaster. It could be the greatest show we do. I'm not quite sure when we would do it, but we may do that. Not tonight, but we may do that. So live chatters, your time could be close at hand. Let's talk about some what-ifs. I ate salmon like, what would you say, Jesse, 20 minutes before the show? And I got what we would call the salmon hiccups right now, and it's really tough. I'm fighting through it. It's my own upstream battle, if you will. Biggest what-ifs in college football this year. Hey, big question for you. Let me put the pen down because I'm not writing anything. What if the state of Texas ends up dominating college football this year? Big gasp. Yes, I know. So this would obviously include Texas being really good, but this would also include Texas A&M being really good. People don't have trouble buying that Texas would be good. You know, the JP poll, I can now confirm for you as of 20 minutes ago, has Texas A&M rated 13 to start the season. A&M's not to be slept on this year. Still a lot of good players out there. Connor Wigman, as a quarterback, if he's healthy, with Mike Elko, who, whatever you're capable of, will squeeze every ounce of potential out of you. What if they're both good? What if out of all this talk about a rematch in a conference title game, it ends up being Texas and Texas A&M that play in Atlanta 6 days after they originally play? Crazier things have happened. That would be crazy, but crazier things have happened. But that's not all it takes to dominate. TCU, Texas Tech, Baylor, can one of them emerge in the Big 12? The rule in the Big 12 is nothing is impossible. SMU is in the ACC, you know. SMU, I didn't tell you this. You didn't hear this from me. SMU is a top 30 team in the JP poll. And unlike the SEC, the ACC is not a conference chock full of top 15 teams. So you get some bounces to go your way. In Dallas, there, the over-under win total's 8.5. What if they pull off some magic? UTSA's got the third best odds to win the American. Texas State has the second best odds to win the Sun Belt. But that's not what I'm asking. I'm not asking what if one of those things happen. I'm talking about full lottery. I'm talking about full slot machine, pull the lever, 777s pop up. Texas and Texas A&M play at a top 10 level this year. One of TCU, Texas Tech, or Baylor go dark horse mode and win the Big 12. SMU is in the ACC championship game. Texas State wins the Sun Belt. UTSA wins the American. Well, the state of Texas would be as insufferable as it's ever been in a long, long and storied history of insufferability. That's the answer to the what if. I'd be here for it because we do great in Texas. But as for the rest of you, it would be a long December, a longer December than the Counting Crows ever thought about singing. Next up, what if Oregon wins the Big Ten? It would be a big shot to the pride bone of the Big Ten. Not in a good way. Now, Oregon would be on top of the world. Oregon could go on to do great things. Maybe they win the national championship. Whomst amongst us knows. But for a conference that prides itself as being one of the best in America, Matt Rule says it is the best in America. For a conference that prides itself on being one of, if not the best in America, you can't just be letting Oregon come in and pants you, can you? But maybe they will. Now, some good would come of this. Sometimes it takes being exposed. And if that's what we want to call that, that's fine. Oregon's a really good team. There's no shame in losing to them. But if they come in and day one, they just walk right to the head table, boy, it makes it look bad. The optics are the Big Ten was just ripe for the plucking. And some team that was in the Pac-12 5 minutes ago came in and did it. How strong really were we? That's how they talk about it. Whether that's reality, whether that's logical or not, that's how they talk about it. But it would be good in some ways because that embarrassment would lead to a collective galvanization and it would lead to people collectively saying, well, we got to up our game. And when a conference gets it in its mind that it has to up its game, not the worst thing in the world. Lastly, this is scary stuff for my friends down in Louisiana. What if LSU regresses again? So they went 9-3 last year. Yeah, you remember how bad the defense was. They would have been a playoff team if we had a 12-team format last year. So it wasn't horrible. It wasn't horrific or anything like that. And they ended up 10-3 with the bowl win. So they ended up a double-digit win team with a Heisman Trophy winner. Trust me, it can get a lot worse than that. So what if they slide further back? What if instead of a springboard bounce back year, they slide further back? Their over-under win total is 9.5. It's heavily juiced to the under. So what if they go 8-4? First off, is that really regressing? Now this is really where you'd have some detachment of logic from emotion. Because to me, I look at LSU, and that's one of the most volatile teams in America this year. Because there are really good players there they could compete for a title with. And there are really big holes potentially in question marks on that roster they could go 7-5 with. That's a really volatile team. If they go 8-4, that's not a disaster. It's not up to standard. It's believable they could go 8-4, though. And it's believable that I could look at them go 8-4. I could easily envision a world where I say, all right, yeah, it wasn't good enough. But we should have known when they whiffed in the portal that they wouldn't have the defensive front depth to make it through an entire season. We should have known that there were going to be several hiccups along the way, but they made the right hires. Now, this time next year, year 2 under this defensive staff, and maybe they made better portal moves. They're recruiting great right now. I would feel like, all right, everything's fine here, but everything wouldn't be fine. That's logic. So we're talking about emotion, not logic. The emotional reaction would be, burn it down. 8-4, what are we doing right now? Burn it down. Let's start over. And then that's the fringed like 5%. But then there would be another solid, fairly reasonable chunk of 20% or 30% of LSU fans who would also think, hot seat talk, Brian Kelly's got to either shape up or ship out if people still say that. And I don't think it would be time to talk like that at all. And it would be depending on who the losses were to, and are they close losses? Are they blowouts? Yes, I get all that. But is 8-4 really regression? Yes, it is backwards, but is it really viewed as regression? I don't know. Recruiting is important, as you know, because LSU is doing a great job of it right now. I'm about to talk about it with another team that allegedly I've never talked about before in recruiting. I disagree, but that's the allegation. You guys are doing some of the best recruiting in the world, and I have it on my index finger right now via Post-it note to thank you. So I have been asking you to like the videos the way you've always done. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure, even if you've been listening or watching the show for 2 years, check and make sure you're subscribed, because a lot of you think you are and you aren't. But then the third thing is, I've just humbly asked you, make sure 5 of your friends do the same thing. I know you go to work. Some of you are in school still. I know some of you go to the gym. You're all talking to your buddies about the same thing. We're not all that dissimilar. We all love college football. That's why we're here. A lot of the folks you hang out with love college football. A lot of them don't know where to go to get the kind of college football talk that we all love. That's why we built this show the way we did. And the way we grow it is to make sure we recruit in big numbers over here. So all you got to do is continue doing what you've been doing. That's where I wanted to thank you, because our numbers have spiked. So I know you guys are doing it. Just keep doing it. Thank you, and keep doing it. That's all I wanted to say to you on that front. Now, as for recruiting on a much more real level as it relates to this sport, Tennessee's on fire right now, and I would suggest you pay attention to Tennessee because more commits are coming. They have the number 5 class in the country right now. And I know that you pay a lot of attention to Ohio State. You pay a lot of attention to Alabama. You pay a lot of attention to Georgia. You pay a lot of attention to Texas. You need to be paying attention to Tennessee. Tennessee is not viewed as an elite recruiting outfit right now. Tennessee is not viewed as an elite program because they're not. They're neither of those things. They have not been. They haven't been an elite program for a long time. They haven't been an elite recruiter for a long time. They can be both. Nothing in the past 25 years has changed in this sport fundamentally that would ever prevent Tennessee from being what they once were. The only thing that has stood in Tennessee's way is Tennessee. Tennessee may be getting out of Tennessee's way. Even further, Tennessee may be figuring out how to put the collective power of Vol Nation, if you will, into the sails of the program. So the last 3 weeks, what have they done? Well, they've grabbed 3 top 150 kids. More are coming. I don't want to get specific. It's irrelevant. Tennessee fans know who I'm talking about, and if you're a Rutgers fan, you don't care. But they have more commits coming. George McIntyre is a kid you're looking at B-roll of right now. Plays just down the road, actually, at Brentwood Academy. He is a quarterback committed for that class. 6'5", 190. He's been a really good recruiter for that class. All the hallmarks of the best classes, you hear the same thing. The kids end up being the best recruiters. You got to have some alpha types that take the lead and recruit for you. All the best classes have it. Tennessee's got that here. Some things you need to know. And I've got a pretty good view of this and have talked to some folks over at Tennessee and have talked to some folks that have recruited against Tennessee. I was talking to someone the other night that's been already in a couple of heads-up battles against Tennessee. So this is feedback from inside the organization there, and this is feedback from other organizations. First thing, Josh Heupel is very cerebral about how they recruit. It's not checkers, man. It's more chess to that guy. And he's very, very intentional about what they do. They're very intentional, and they're excellent at how early they identify kids and how ahead of the curve they are in evals. They're really good at that. And that just means that they get a head start on some other programs with kids they're going to end up competing with. Number two, the NIL structure is top-notch there. If you don't know any better, you think that just means they have a lot of money they can throw around. They do have a lot of money they can throw around. That is not NIL recruiting anymore. It was for about 5 minutes. For about 5 minutes, NIL was who can offer the most money. It was just very surface-based. Okay, real recruiting in the NIL era is several layers deep. It is not just, I can get you this much money over this many years. There is an entire plan that has to be laid out. And secondly, if you're recruiting top-end players, they're getting money from anywhere they go. So the money, ironically, is not what pushes most of these recruitments over the finish line. It's the plan. Okay, Texas is brilliant at this. Oregon's brilliant at this. There are a couple other programs that are recruiting halfway decently right now that I think have a ways to go in that. Tennessee, though, is one of the sneakiest, well-put-together NIL operations in college football right now. Not just because they've got money they can spend, it's because they understand not just the A part, but the B, C, D, E, F, G part as well. And thirdly, there is excellent synergy up there. It's always been just a firecracker waiting to be lit. It's been that way for years and years and years. You got a small taste of that in 2022. And I think it stunned a lot of the country when you watched them upset Alabama and you watched that entire grand spectacle that was the Tennessee fan base. And I was on the show the next night, I remember, because we had been at the game. We were on the field for that. And then the next night, I remember doing a show, and I remember saying, yeah, you saw that great crowd last night, and you saw that passion and that enthusiasm, but anybody can get worked up when they're beating Alabama. Those people had never left. Tennessee folks, over years and years and years, and many different coaching staffs of underachievement, they still showed up. That's why I've looked at them. I remember in 2019 when LSU made their run, and we were talking amongst ourselves in the office one day, and we were asking, who's the next LSU? What's the next fan base? It's just a sleeping giant. LSU hadn't been asleep nearly as long as Tennessee has, but it's a sleeping giant program, and they're just waiting to explode. It's Tennessee. It's always been Tennessee. It's A&M. It's Tennessee, Arizona State, kind of, but it's Tennessee. Everything's there. Everything's there, and unlike this time last year, if I'm a recruit and I go over there, there's not this lingering NCAA cloud. They got all that figured out. You got a taste of what this thing could be in 2022. There's a lot of really good in their program right now that is knocking on the door of great to elite. That's the next step. Okay, it wasn't an overnight thing. Josh Heupel didn't walk in and they immediately became Bama 2.0. It's happening at Tennessee in a much more realistic way. A much more realistic way is step by step by step by step. And in an immediate gratification world, a lot of the country's paying attention initially, and then they don't immediately see you win a title, so they turn their back and walk away, and meanwhile, you're just step by step by step by step. Tennessee's the one to keep an eye on. Tennessee's the program to keep an eye on. If you want to know which program that's not currently at the head table of college football will probably be the next one given their current trajectory to join the head table of college football, it's Tennessee. And I've been waiting for it. Next up, biggest questions. I got a couple of them here, so these aren't all of the biggest questions in college football this year. 2 questions that I have, though. How many impact true freshmen are we going to have this year? Now, we'll have several true freshmen that play, but I mean the ones that at the end of the year were a focal point of their team. Dylan Raiola at Nebraska has to be at the top of this list. I mean, Dylan Raiola, 5-star quarterback. He's committed to Georgia forever. He decommits. He goes to Nebraska. They've got a workable path this year. Like Nebraska, from a scheduling standpoint, from a team dynamic standpoint, they got a workable path to where if he's good, if Raiola gets plugged in and he's playing B-level quarterback there, then you still got the same defense they had. You still got the same defensive staff they had. If you can just get me a top 45 offense, they go from like 6-win caliber team to playoff sleeper team. Do you hear what I said? I didn't mince words. If they get B level or better quarterback play, given the schedule they have, and given the usual Matt Rule year 1 to year 2 thing that's always happened in his career, that's a fringe playoff team. That's the definition of an impact freshman, especially at the quarterback position. 2 wide receivers, though, I have to talk about here as well. Jeremiah Smith was the top-rated wide receiver, top-rated player in the country for this past recruiting cycle. He's just different than anyone there. It's really interesting when you think about how loaded Ohio State is, and yet the best football players on either side of the ball could end up being Caleb Downs, who was at Bama last year, and Jeremiah Smith, who was in high school last year. Now, that's lofty praise for a true freshman. There aren't many true freshmen I ever would have spoken about like this. He's one of them. Just totally different. It won't take long. And they have a schedule that offers several tune-up opportunities to sort of get him in rhythm, get him lathered up. He may be their wide receiver 1 a month into the season, if he's not already. A lot of people in the program think he is already, but there are other good receivers. Ibuka, for example, who's still walking around up there. But Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall, and Michigan State give you a really good idea of what you got by the time you play Iowa and then Oregon back-to-back. He can take over games. When they get in a playoff situation, like when they get in a Big Ten championship game situation, that's the kind of guy who is open when he's covered. And I know they've had him. They just had a kid named Marvin Harrison Jr. leave from up there. And I'm not telling you that this is an apples-to-apples replacement, but I'm also not telling you he may not end up being better than him. Again, these are words that are weighty. I know they are. I know who I'm talking about too, though. Cam Coleman is another one down at Auburn. He has to step in day one. Ohio State doesn't have to have Jeremiah Smith to still be a good team. Auburn has to have Cam Coleman to even have a shot at being a decent team this year. Looks like an alien. I was there watching them practice in spring. I did not see names on jerseys. I'm only looking at numbers, and I'm asking, like Kirk Sampson's there, the SID down there, and I'm saying, Kirk, that one right there, who's that? Oh, that's Coleman. Oh, okay, that's true freshman. Cool, okay. Looks different than anyone there. Got to play. Hugh Freeze was on the show. He said, yep, they may not all be ready, but these freshmen are going to have to play. This is mandatory. For Peyton Thorne to have any kind of rebound year, Cam Coleman has to be an integral part of that. There aren't any other options to be that wide receiver 1. So if he is that and he pans out, then all of a sudden the run game opens up a whole lot more. Peyton Thorne's got guys to actually throw to, which he didn't last year. And Auburn could go from an average team, 6 or 7 wins, to a dark horse wild card kind of team. Probably not winning the SEC, but 8 or 9 wins this year for Auburn would be a really, really good thing. Okay, that's one question. Then I've got another question for you. Now this one I had to do some thinking on. Which program would you call the biggest sleeper program in college football? Because I think it's Central Florida. I think it's UCF. UCF has been hiding in plain sight to me. They did not get added to the Big 12 and then rest on the laurels of being a Power 5 or now a Power 4 team, which they could have. When you get granted that access, you could just throw your hands up and kick your feet up and say, all right, we're here now. We're going to make more money. Good enough is enough. Let's cruise. That's not what they did. They got welcome to the party, and then they said, we're actually going to try and run the party. Not ruin it, running the party. They invested big time, and they're continuing to invest. They're the only Big 12 school in this part of the country. So think about the talent acquisition standpoint here. First off, just from a recruiting standpoint, to have a program in the middle of Orlando get to recruit as the lone conference member within like 1,000 miles of Orlando and of Florida, that's one benefit. But the other benefit, as we've already seen, is they're a massive portal destination. Because a lot of kids come from Florida and it doesn't work out somewhere. They want to go back closer to home. There it is. It's UCF. Javon Baker, just this past year, ends up getting drafted. He didn't start his career at UCF. He started his career at Bama. And then he ended up at UCF because he wanted to transfer down there. KJ Jefferson is their quarterback this year. He was at Arkansas last year. So you'll see him continue to load up in portal guys. But recruiting, they should be, and already are, and should continue to be one of, if not the best recruiting programs in the Big 12. There is a massive facilities upgrade project underway. When I was down there, I was in Malzahn's office. They've got some mock-up designs of what that place is about to look like. You won't recognize it. So if you've been down there, and then you go down there again 5 years from now, or like 3 years from now, whenever they have that completed, you won't recognize that place. Unbelievable. And not everyone is taking a deep dive into facilities enhancement these days, because that money's going elsewhere, if you know what I mean. So they will recruit as well as anyone in the Big 12. They'll portal as well as anyone. The value proposition in recruiting and portal that UCF can offer to a kid is totally unique. No one else in the Big 12 has that. Now, you may be able to pitch, come into play in Dallas if you're TCU, Houston, and Willie Fritz if you're from that part of Texas, but a ton of these kids are just from the Southeast or from Florida and want to go home, or they're in Florida and want to stay in Florida to play. And for whatever reason, maybe it's not FSU or Florida or Miami, or maybe they do have offers from them. And UCF says, hey, we're at the same table now. They're going to win some of those battles. And they've got a head coach that's played at the highest level the sport has to offer. He's beaten the best, had as good a head-to-head record against Nick Saban as anyone. He did better against Saban than Kirby did. And now, not only do you have him, but you've got him totally at ease. Malzahn doesn't strike me as the guy looking to get out of Orlando. He strikes me as the guy who settled into Orlando. So you got a guy who's got a championship pedigree, who's been around the block, who understands how to call plays, and he's got an infrastructure around him that understands how to recruit. And they got good minds in the building. And then you've got the unique value play of we're in Florida and no one else is. That's an underrated program. Who's talking about Central Florida right now? I mean, in the mainstream conversation, not a lot of people are. That's the definition of a sleeper program. FanDuel's got odds on them to win the Big 12 right now if you wanted to go bet it. I should have told you this earlier. Where'd that piece of paper go? Oh, I can look at this. I can tell you, and this is exclusive information, this is proprietary, so keep this between us. Central Florida is they're the number 27 team in the JP poll. They're just outside the top 25. So, if you want to go bet the over, bet the under, bet them as a dark horse to make the playoff, bet them in week 1, I don't care. Do whatever you want to do, just do it at FanDuel. And if you don't want to do any of that, and if you don't even bet, but you are curious to see, what their over-under win total is just for argument's sake, because you want to look smart against your buddy tomorrow at work, also go to FanDuel. They're the exclusive odds provider of our show. We really appreciate them. They take care of us. They will take care of you. And everyone just takes care of everyone around here. We really appreciate them. Okay, lastly, always a fat show on Sunday nights. We have the most we're back energy that we've had in a long time. Bold Predictions, Chapter 27 of Bold Predictions. What do you believe that you'd bet your own money on? All of these are a 9 or bolder tonight. So I want to see the betting slips is what I'm saying. First up, this one's really interesting. Matthew from Fairfield, Connecticut said, Alabama will be undefeated at home, but sub 500 on the road. So that means they beat Georgia and Missouri and Auburn because they play them at home. But they will lose at least 3 of these games: Wisconsin, Vandy, Tennessee, LSU, Ole Miss. And you could sell me that Bama loses against Oklahoma or Tennessee or LSU. Wisconsin's a kind of a sleeper type of team. I don't know, but yeah, I could see that happening. But the kind of team that loses those games, that team's also going to beat Georgia at home? That's interesting. They are minus 9.5 at Wisconsin at FanDuel. They are a slight underdog at LSU right now, plus 2.5. They are slight favorites at Oklahoma. They'll probably be a slight favorite at Tennessee, maybe. They are plus touchdown or better. They're minus touchdown or better against Missouri and Auburn. So they'll be favored against both of those teams by over a touchdown right now. It sounds terrible, doesn't it? It sounds like undefeated at home, sub 500 on the road. That would probably be a 9-3 season. Maybe good enough to make the playoff. Having said that, because of how unique this is, I'm going to make it a 9 on the boldness scale. Next up, this one's also kind of threading the needle, but it could happen. Mitch from Orlando, he said, Miami will defeat Florida State twice this season and prevent them from making the playoffs 2 years in a row. So Miami beats FSU in the regular season. They then play in the conference title game. Miami beats them again, and Florida State doesn't make the playoff. That's a 9.5 on the boldness scale. Now, the first two things are not crazy. Florida State plays at Miami. They're a 1.5-point favorite. So that game's really close to being a toss-up. Let's just say, for argument's sake, they played in the conference title game. FanDuel had to set the line today. You're probably looking at FSU minus 3.5 or minus 4, something like that. That's not crazy to think Miami could win either one of those. But here's the thing. We've got to thread a needle here, because if Miami beats Florida State the first time, and that's on October 26th, Florida State still has to be good enough to make it to the ACC title game. But they probably also have to be bad enough to lose another game out of conference, because I need them to probably be a 2-loss team by the time they make it to the ACC title game. But they can't be losing conference games, because then they may not make it to the ACC title game. So they may lose to Notre Dame. They go there on November 9th, could easily see them losing that game. They'll probably be an underdog that game. So if they lose that one and they've lost against Miami, and they go to Charlotte 10-2, and then they lose to Miami again, they're 10-3, yes, this prediction just happened. FSU would be out of the playoff. Miami would have beaten them 2 times. It's just tough to thread the needle. And for that reason, I make that a 9.5 on the boldness scale. We've got another 9.5 here. Remember the rule on the show. If you make a prediction that's a 9.5 or higher and it hits, you get a chalice of supremacy. What about Maryland here? Zach says Maryland's going to win 10 games. Well, I don't think they are, Zach. So I'm going to make that a 9.5. Their total is 6.5 wins. They can only lose 2 of these games. So they could start 6-0. Here's what could be really frustrating for you, Zach. They may start 6-0. UConn, Michigan State, Virginia, Villanova, Indiana, Northwestern. There's a 6-0 start there for Maryland. But then they got Southern Cal, and they go to Minnesota, and then they go to Oregon, and then they got Rutgers, and then they got Iowa and Penn State, and they can only lose 2 of those to be a 10-win team, and that's if they start 6-0. There's a new quarterback there. They're 123rd in returning offensive production. Maryland is not a reload type of team. You don't just blindly believe in them, even though you don't know the players, because they've recruited top 5 classes. They haven't. So that's tough to do. So I got an itchy nose. I'm going to make that a 9.5. I think that's fair. And lastly, Missouri. From Laramie, Wyoming here. We got a prediction about Missouri. They'll make the playoff, and they'll win a playoff game. 9 on the boldness scale. No more, no less. To make the playoff right now, if you wanted to bet yes, Missouri makes the playoff, they are plus 184 at FanDuel. You can go do that right now. Their total over-under is 9.5. They're 17th in returning production, but there's a big split. So they're 10th in returning offensive production. Brady Cook, Luther Burden. But they're 64th in returning defensive production, and they lost stud coaches on that side of the ball as well. They only face one team this entire season that is in the top 10 at FanDuel in odds to win it all, and that's at Alabama on the 26th. But they can't just make the playoff. They've got to make it and win a playoff game. And because of that, I give that a 9 on the boldness scale. Long show tonight. We appreciate it so much. Make sure you guys subscribed to the YouTube channel and the podcast, and recruit 5 of your friends to do the same. I will have a Late Kick Extra pod out for you sometime Tuesday or Wednesday. We'll be back here live same time Thursday. We're here. The JP poll has dropped. We're here. Take care. For Director Colin, Producer Jesse, I'm Josh Pate. Have a great start to your week, and God bless.